Starting at shortstop for the Boston Red Sox, Andy Savitz. Did you see that stop last night?
Your lips to God's ears.
Oh, baby. Did you see Pedroia's stop last night?
Unreal. I just want you to know that Jeff and I did not plan to coordinate our dress, our attire today. But it's a great pleasure, and on behalf of all three of your panelists, we'd like to welcome our out-of-town guests to Red Sox Nation, especially those living a couple of hundred miles south of us. I won't mention any names.
How does third place feel?
I won't mention any names. It's a great pleasure and a great honor for me to be up here today with these two folks, Jeff Swartz and Gary Hirshberg of Stonyfield Yogurt. Now, as a native Bostonian, I have had the pleasure and experienced the wonder of watching Ceres grow over the past 15 or so years to the point where it is one of the leading voices and one of the leading forces on the planet for corporate responsibility. I feel a strong sense of local pride and deep gratitude for what Ceres has done and what they are doing. On the other hand, no one is perfect. There was that lunch they served us yesterday. I mean, what's up with that? Now, I'm a big believer in organics and sustainable consumption, but if that's what we're having for lunch in the future, it's going to be a very hard sell. To be fair to Ceres, there were some Rice Krispie treats later in the day, which in my opinion suggested a very strong comeback for the organization. Now, speaking of local pride, I feel particularly honored and pleased to be able to present two of New England's finest business people. You might call them citizens of the planet. Jeff Swartz and Gary Hirshberg have been working on creating and growing sustainable businesses long before the United Nations defined the term sustainable development in 1987. Jeff is the third generation of Swartzes to lead the family's footwear business, and he has grown Timberland from revenues of $156 million a year in 1989 to $1.6 billion in 2006. And as someone who's been involved in the ACCA awards over the years, I'd just like to give him and Timberland another round of applause. It's a tremendous honor. And I don't know about you, but I loved how he acknowledged Alex. And, you know, this is a hard work, folks. And, you know, the company really deserves all the accolades that are coming its way. Now, Gary has been an environmentalist and a social change agent for his entire life. And being president and CEO of Stonyfield is only the latest way he is pushing for change and showing others the way. Now, my definition of a sustainable business is one that finds the intersection of its business interests and the interests of society. But Gary has taken that even one step further at Stonyfield. One of the company's 5 missions is to serve as a model that environmentally and socially responsible businesses can be profitable, and he has realized this vision at Stonyfield. According to his biography, he has grown the company from 7 cows in 1983 to $300 million in annual sales today, all the while being a model for socially responsible business practices. Gary, that's impressive, but I'm afraid we'll need the 300 million number normalized to cows, or cow equivalents. Actually, I have to make a small correction in how I just described Gary. He is not the CEO of Stonyfield Farms. His biography actually describes him as the CEO of Stonyfield Farms. This proves 2 things beyond a reasonable doubt. 1, he is deeply committed to yogurt. And 2, he is successful enough that he really doesn't care what other people think. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he had nothing to do with yesterday's luncheon menu.
Clearly.
But in the spirit of today's discussion, I'm going to ask Jeff if he would mind referring to himself today as the CEO of Timberland.
You can be the heel.
That really, he's the heel. Yeah, he's the heel.
Now, one last thing about Gary. He is a fellow author, and he has just written his, I believe, first book. entitled Stirring It Up, How to Make Money and Save the World. And I believe he's going to be signing books later today. Gary, congratulations on that fabulous accomplishment. I remember how great I felt in the weeks following the publication of my book, The Triple Bottom Line. See how I did that, Gary?
Oh, very good.
You need to learn how to turn everything
Into the book.
into a mention of your book,
About the book, yeah.
including the introduction of someone else's book. So my job for the next 45 minutes is to ask our CEOs some easy questions so they can tell us how great their companies are.
Good.
But this being Ceres and all that, there is simply no way I'm going to do that. I'll start with some easy questions or two, but as Mindy said yesterday, I'll do a little pushing and shoving of my own. So be prepared. Okay, so now I sit down here, following some very detailed instructions.
So tell us about your book.
Tell us about your book.
All right. All right,
Ask
so
hard questions, yeah.
So let me start with Gary.
Good.
Gary, so what is your favorite yogurt recipe?
Yeah.
All right, so let me start with Gary. And,
good.
you know, you were in the sustainability space, you know, long before my book came out. So maybe the triple bottom line. Maybe you could tell us, you know, how you got there, and really, what does sustainability mean to you and your organization? And Jeff, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Well, clearly, not having your book, I guess it was pure luck. that we
I love these guys.
well, first, I need to say that we're going to get Jeff past 90 because if you just keep eating the organic yogurt, it'll all be taken care of.
Yeah,
okay?
that's good. I'm looking
Just
forward
going to solve that.
Yep.
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here with you all. I think Stonyfield was the first signer of the Ceres principles, actually. And the problem, I don't remember when that was. And the problem with trying to remember things like that nowadays is I'm usually off by a decade. So I'm not even going to try to put years to it. You know, my background is actually, I studied dendroclimatology. And if you want to know what that is, come see me later at the book signing back in the 70s. But my sort of Bible was the limits to growth study that the Meadows and others had done. Many of you have probably seen it. The 2004 version more or less corroborated the data that was available in 1972, which showed that exactly what Jeff talked about, that if humans kept our population growing and our resource consumption on the same track, the trajectory that we'd been on through the 20th century, basically our children were going to be handed a terribly raw deal by 2050. And, you know, in my academic career, I came to realize the mythologies that drive a lot of our economic system. For example, just the mythology of externalities. The idea that there are direct consequences of our commerce that, because they're not recorded on our balance sheets or income statements, don't exist. Or more precisely, no one's accountable for them. That's obviously pure mythology. It's just a fabrication of economic convenience. There's the myth of away, the idea that we can send waste to this place that's sort of Oz-like. There's the myth that the way that we treat our biological waste is that the solution to pollution is dilution, and so on. And you can go on with these myths. And it was all fairly depressing and sobering stuff for me back in my teens and early 20s. And so I went to work at an ecological research institute that some of you may remember called the New Alchemy Institute, where we built extraordinary solar-powered food-growing shelters, 100% sun-powered. Here in Cape Cod, we had bananas, figs, papayas growing in the middle of winter with 3 and 4 feet of snow outside, with 100% solar power, 100% wind-driven energy, no pesticides, herbicides, or chemical fertilizers. It worked beautifully. We had 25,000 people visiting us every year. And then I had this sort of epiphany, which is I went to visit my mother in 1981. Reagan had just come in and slashed funding for my institute's resources. So I was in a process of self-evaluation of how we were going to solve this financial crisis. And I went and Kraft Food, at the Epcot Center, Kraft Foods had funded something called the Land Pavilion, where they were showing how food would be grown in the future. And it was basically a monument to conventional agriculture with all the foibles and problems of extracting the Earth's crust and creating hypoxias in the Gulf of Mexico from excessive nitrification and depletion of topsoils and so on. I mean, it was clearly the wrong direction. But the most horrifying part for me was seeing that for the 25,000 people who visited my institute every year, that's how many people paid to go there every day. And I came out of this exhibit, and this business-hating child of the 60s declared to my mom, I have to become Kraft Foods. And so the long and the short of this story is 14 years later to the day, we started Stonyfield from that epiphany and with the 7 cows. And 14 years later to the day, we actually passed Kraft in sales of yogurt, and now I think we're 6 times their size. We've had a 18-year compounded annual growth rate of over 26%. And our bottom line has grown proportionally. And yet, what I've discovered, and I think this is to the heart of our discussion, is that it is possible that for business to be a part of the solutions, to embrace what we were showing at our institute in economic ways, not by cheapening our products, not by cheapening our goods. The core principle here is we don't mind taking we'll cut costs wherever we can, but we're not going to shrink our gross margins to the point where the quality of food is below our standards, or the quality of our support for our farmers, the stewards of the land who keep us and our future intact, are going to be sacrificed. And so my gross margins are 10 points behind Dannon and Yoplait, but my net margins are the same or north of theirs. And the way we've pioneered that is by effectively finding efficiency in other places. A lot of the stuff that you have been rewarding here. Mining our P&L viciously for every conceivable waste of CO2, of excess use of fossil fuels. We have a carbon footprint methodology that we apply to the entire business. We have 10 what we call MAP teams, Mission Action Plan teams, who concentrate on the 10 top places out of our carbon footprint, and they get bonuses and job descriptions to actually drive CO2 or fossil fuels out of the system. And then conversely, on the other side, pioneering new guerrilla techniques that make us less dependent on advertising. That's how we make it back up below the gross margin line. And the bottom line is we've been asking these questions, why not? Why not engage the farmer as our true partner in the process? Why not talk intelligently to the consumer? Why not mine the P&L? Why not triple the walls of our coolers and get, a higher CapEx, but especially at $120 a barrel oil, a much quicker return? And so this mission statement that you mentioned has really been our driver. We try to apply that mission in calculations of everything from transport, logistics, supply chain, you name it. And of course, the book summarizes a lot of that. I'll tell you one thing. I'm learning. I'm learning. And I'll just say one last thing quickly. I was standing in Florida about a year and a half ago. I was holding a competitor's yogurt cup on the shelf. I was reading an ingredient that I still can't pronounce. And a little old lady came up to me and tugged me in the elbow and said, "Young man, someone your age really should be eating the Stonyfield." And it was sort of like a religious experience. You got to be there. And I said, "Well, why?" And she said, "Well, do you know that they give 10% of their profits to environmental causes, and they pay farmers top dollar for organic milk, and they were the first manufacturer to offset 100% of their emissions from their manufacturing?" I said, "Thanks, Mom." No, I said, "How do you know all this stuff?" She said this. She said, "My husband recently died, and I've got grandchildren, and I want to stick around to see them grow. And the girls and I, her bridge club, we check out these companies. We go to the websites. And what I discovered in that one little anecdote, of course, I hired her on the spot. What I discovered is that loyalty is something that comes from authenticity. It comes from actually not just having a mission statement, but integrating, as this guy has, as this company has. A genuine, deep-held commitment to the planet and a willingness to talk intelligently and openly, not just about what we do well, but what we don't do well, has bonded us to consumers. And that is how we're going to solve this crisis. We're not going to solve it by cheapening food. I think cheap food era is over. We're going to solve it by finding ways to build loyalty among our consumers, and that's only going to come from authenticity and true commitment.
Thank you very much, Gary, for that thoughtful...
And buy his book.
And buy his book. Jeff, just how comfortable are your shoes? No. Could you sort of reflect on what Gary said in terms of your own company and experience?
Well, I don't want to, we're not trying to have laughing nor trying to have loving, but we also have to, but you can't miss the opportunity to say, I can't miss the opportunity to say that it's a big deal. The influence you have, even before you wrote the book, and I'm not making a joke about the book because sometimes a book, they say there's 3 indications when you should short a stock. The CEO writes a book that it's a new campus, or there's a third, they build a new campus, there's a third indication of it kind of gone off the mission. You don't, if you know Gary at all, you know that he only lives his mission. Right? It's not what he does, it's who he is. And so the book is just another externalizing of mission. And it's a well-written book, and that's a fact, but it's an important book because it seeks to invite collaboration with consumers. The most powerful person in the whole world is the little old woman who says, or the little old man who says, I'm going to prefer this product to that product. Because at Timberland, we have this thing called Path of Service. There's 5,000 Timberland people. They have 40 hours of community service to invest. And if everybody used their 40 hours as religiously as they intend to, that's however many hours that is. I was a comparative literature major at Brown. So 40 times 5,000 is a big number. I'm not sure what it is. And
it's 20.
20-something, yeah. There's a 2 at the beginning, and I always get the zeros wrong. That's why we have a CFO before earnings release. But one of the things about comparative literature, right, which is comparative matters, size matters, right? There are 30-ish million consumers this year at Timberland who are going to reach into their pocket. They're going to take out $100 American, plus or minus, and buy something they don't fundamentally need from Timberland, that they choose to desire. Now, if those 30 million consumers decided to invest not 40 hours of community service, but if they invested 8 hours with us on Earth Day, for example, in doing community greening, which is an important part of how we externalize our values, that's just a bigger number, right? 30 million times 8 is a lot more than 5,000 times 40. And so the purpose of books, I don't know, and I read them, I don't write them, I think is this notion of a leveraged form of engagement. And I got to tell you that growing up in a family business, that's how I learned, that's the model that was literally physically imprinted. My dad was and is a very direct kind of guy. I worked for him when I was a kid, and I worked in the factory, the mill in New Hampshire, which is now condominiums. And I remember, my dad's a very stern fellow in the factory, and I remember I was assigned the job of sweeping the floors. It sounds apocryphal, but it was interesting. And so I was sweeping away, and I thought I'd mastered it. Then we had a sort of Zen conversation because I don't mean to indulge, but there was a trash chute in the middle of the 3rd floor. And the trash went in the chute, went down the chute, went into the dump truck, went into the landfill. Now, I know that in ways that nobody else knows that, because I was 11 years old, and my mentor, who was the garbage master at Timberland, had me approach the chute with my broom, and he pointed out to me things were stuck, and that the only way you could get them through is if you, and so I'm an 11-year-old, relatively naive, the son of the owner, and so I press something, and I go right down the chute, and I land in the dump truck, and the entire factory, of course, laughing at yours truly, and my father was absolutely out of his mind. And he wanted to make me understand the notion of interconnection, because I was actually quite, I was upset. What I to get the garbage? And he said to me, look, if the garbage backs up, it's an ecosystem conversation. He didn't use those terms, but he said, if the garbage builds up on the floor, then the workflow slows down. If the workflow slows down, you don't go to college. And so I got this. It's all about the workflow thing, right? And so, you know, there I am, 11 years old, and I got it. It's all about the workflow. And then off goes this klaxon horn, and it's in the middle of the morning, and people walk away from their machines. And I thought, oh, what's going on? And they leave, and my father's watching them. See ya, goodbye, see ya. And it's not break, because you get a hot dog at break. So what's going on? And Dad said, that's the fire alarm here in Newmarket. And I said, where are they going? They're leaving them. Workflow. He says, okay, next value chain notion. Fire starts, fire alarm goes off, volunteer fire department goes to put out fire, or the mill burns down, you don't go to college. And I thought, it's not workflow, it's interconnection. It is dependency one upon the other. So I didn't have an intellectual grounding in this. I don't even know if I had a principled grounding in this notion of value chain and the interdependencies that exist in the value chain, but I had a visceral understanding imprinted upon me that, that my brother is my keeper and I am my brother's keeper too. That's a religious notion, and that's a bootmaker's notion. And we've lived against that standard for 3 generations in our business, not backed up by the sophisticated frame that Gary brings, but by kind of this New England, if it doesn't happen then, right? If it doesn't happen, it all falls apart. It's a very poignant and visceral model, and it creates pressure, and pressure yields innovation. The things that we do now, and by the way, innovation is a really interesting notion across supply chain. I think there are leaders from our most potent, right? Gary's at 6 times Kraft's yogurt sales. Our most potent competitors at 10 times our sales in almost every country we compete in. I think there are Nike folks in the room here today. I want to say, in the presence of the Nike folks, innovation is in our space. The same notion about in the mill is extraordinary. What happens when competitors collaborate in an innovative fashion? The introduction of water-based adhesives into our supply chain, reducing volatile organic compounds from the experience of a young woman in a developing economy who's putting together 2 pieces of leather that don't want to stick together. That innovation did not come from Timberland, it came from Nike. Nike was the first in our space to think about the issue of solvents in the manufacturing process. And the fact is, we are absolutely fierce, no quarter given, no quarter asked competitors in the marketplace, and yet the activists at Nike, blessed by the senior leaders at the highest level, are not only willing, but are active collaborators, partly because of folks like Ceres who bring us together. But you talk about innovation. Dad taught me the model in the factory, for our purpose. Nike's taught me the model about in our industry, between competitors who care about the same notions as social outcomes. And so it may sound a little bizarre for the Timberland guy to be throwing a bouquet, not just at his teacher from Stonyfield, but at his competitor from Nike. But to me, it's the very same model. Either we will collaborate together or we will perish separately, period, finish.
Mm-hmm. Let me not sure where we go from here, but
How about home?
all right. Fenway. Jeff, let me follow up with that. I mean, I think collaboration within the industry is important, but also, as you pointed out in your remarks and beforehand, working with your supply chain is critical, especially in your industry, or with some of the issues that arose around child labor in the mid-'90s and all. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about how you see that issue and what you're doing about it and the importance of it, really.
I think that stakeholders can play a larger role. And if you set as an outcome the notion of organized and disciplined and structured collaboration between unnaturally aligned forces, right? That was a big sentence, right? Maybe not even well structured. So I'm going to try again. If you think about a new alchemy of combining together not in an ad hoc way, but in a thoughtful way, the kind of collaboration that needs to exist regularly in order to create real solutions, sustainable solutions to challenges across value chains. I think the stakeholder world can't do a good enough job, how's that, of convening and focusing those kind of efforts. I was in China either last week or the week before, relatively speaking, lost track of any notion of time zone, and I was talking with an owner, publicly traded company, the largest shoe manufacturer on earth, and I was selling him on the notion of sustainable energy as part of how we run our factories in the Dominican Republic. Solar collectors and wind turbines, and it's an important part of what we believe is a sort of a pilot demonstration of what's possible. Now, it's a scale point, right? And we can talk about the supply chain in relative terms. The amount of energy he uses in transformation is much less than other parts of the supply chain, but I'm also on the where you can hit it. And so I had a conversation with them about sustainable energy. We're a customer. We pay our bills. We're not as big as Nike. We're not as big as Adidas. But we're a customer. He takes us seriously, but it's an ad hoc conversation with a powerful guy with a good heart and a very sharp mind. And I said to him, here's what we're doing in the Dominican. Here's the investments we made. Here's the kind of returns we're getting at $120 a barrel. Here's what it means in terms of relationship to the government, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that was a kind of response. Like, that's interesting, right? We've had conversations like that over 20 years about human rights. We had those conversations about citizen service. We'll have them about product stewardship issues. And so in the notion of did we increment forward towards a solution? We did. It would be very different if there was a way to convene in action format the kind of people that need to sit around that table and make the choices that would lead to not incremental effort, but real sharp pivots within the value chain. It is, when you think about who has to be at the table, if you want to drive shoe factories in South China towards a more sustainable energy profile, you think about who needs to be at the table. It's no matter what Timberland does, even if Timberland and Nike together approached this company, we'll have whatever leverage we have. It would be a far different conversation if there was a way to come together in a, not an ad hoc fashion, but in a really thoughtful way against a very specific outcome, in a respectful way, engaging the different voices that need to be there. Then we could make change differently than we do today. So even when we do get industry collaboration, you will not solve the value chain challenges that exist simply, certainly one company won't. Even one industry can't. When you think of all the industries that are involved in making an Earthkeeper boot, there must be 50 of them. And so, and they cross nation-state borders, and they have different elements of their supply chain. If you can't find a way to create collaborations in a formal way, not in an ad hoc way, we're going to be left not shouting in the dark, but having these sort of endless one-off conversations. That's my hope for the role of the activist in convening different kinds of collaborative conversations.
Well, I think I can understand why you guys won the reporting award, because
Too much, yeah.
you're so focused on the need for collaboration and working together, and reporting is clearly, you know, one vehicle for that. So, you know, that's all coming together. Gary, it sounds like you want to say something.
Supply chain is everything. I mean, in our own context, in our carbon map, I can show you on a scale that we were the first manufacturer in America in '94 to offset 100% of the CO2 emissions from our manufacturing. And on a pie chart of our total climate footprint, it's like this. It's a rounding error. It's not a small number, and it's an important number. But in the big picture, milk, cups, fruit, and all the transport, and the grain that feeds what Jeff was speaking about earlier is everything. And while I agree, and certainly the organic food movement is a collaborative network. You know, we're proud of our 20% compounded growth rate for a decade. We're proud of our $18.5 billion in sales last year. But we're only 3.5% of total U.S. foods. We too are a rounding error. And if we're serious about detoxifying our agriculture and reinvesting in our species equity, which is our topsoil, and stopping our topsoil and excess nitrogen from running off into the Gulf of Mexico and the mouths of every other leading river in the world, and creating these anaerobic zones, these hypoxic situations. If we're serious about farm worker health, if we're serious about the fact that a baby born in Boston or San Francisco this morning will have 288 chemicals in her cord blood, 188 of which are suspected or potential carcinogens, which cannot be good. I mean, people say to me, organic isn't proven, and my comment is it's the chemicals that aren't proven. We've been on a 90-year experiment with our bodies and the planet, and as they say in politics, the early returns are not good. And so if we're serious about changing all this stuff, then we've got to move ourselves to 10%, 12, 15, 25, 50% share. This means quadrupling, quintupling, whatever, multiple, many fold increases in our supply chain. Now, the good news is that every effort we've made to improve our supply chain, even unilaterally, has turned out to be highly profitable for us. When Bush took office and it was $26 a barrel oil, and everyone said it'll never be $100, and we did all these silly things like put photovoltaics on our roof and pay our farmers to put in methane digesters on the farms to manage their manure better, and we built a waste treatment plant that turned our waste into biogas and energy, and yeah, the capex was a little higher, the paybacks looked a little long, we did it because it was the right thing. Now, not only do we look like geniuses, we actually, in fact, look like idiots that we didn't do more of it. because now it doesn't take anybody, any rocket scientist, to know where oil is going. It's going to $150 or $200. And at those prices, everything changes. Our commutes here this morning, the width of the roads that we drove on, the size of the cars. You know, just look at Europe, who's been paying the real costs of fuel and food while we've been living in our kind of illusory, subsidized dreams here. But the implications are devastating in one respect for this kind of inflation that I think we're going to go through. But the opportunity in commerce, the upside, is if you can attack the supply chain, that 98% footprint, and take carbon, take CO2, take fossil fuels out of the equation or reduce them, you're going to be laughing all the way to the bank. Yep. And by the way, organics, I mean, the studies are getting out there now. Organics, by putting carbon into the soil instead of into the atmosphere, is clearly revealing itself to be a very, very economic, not just sustainable in the ecologic sense, but in the economic sense of the word. I have an organic sugar operation in Brazil on 50,000 acres. 5 years ago, organic sugar cost 100% premium to conventional. This year, right now, it's exactly the same cost as conventional.
Wow.
Part of that is the yields have gone up. The input costs have gone down. The soil is more porous. It has more carbon, so you need less horsepower to till it. It's retaining more moisture from the rainfall or the irrigation. You have more biodiversity, which means better natural pest control, et cetera, et cetera. And part of it is that conventional is going like this because the link between conventional foods and petroleum, because of this insularity that we've had from reality in the cheap oil era, the lines are literally crossing, and I'm seeing that in almost every commodity I've got. So for me, and supply chain is not only for me the most urgent focus, but it's the most urgent for all of us. Walmart has done more to rivet the world's attention by convening a meeting. Lee Scott called a meeting in October of his entire supply chain. That's every manufacturer on earth who came to see them. And he said companies who reduce their carbon footprints are going to get rewarded with more shelf space and premium position. And you know what? Stonyfield, I went down and gave a talk on sustainability in December following that. I went to one of their Saturday morning love-ins that they have. They're sort of like a religious gathering. It's an amazing spiritual event. Honestly, I'm not kidding. And I don't know if any of you know who Ryan Seacrest is. I unfortunately never watched that show, so I didn't know. When I arrived, 1,800 people were wiggling and singing with Ryan competing for, Walmart Idol or something, and I had to talk about sustainability right after that. It was a tough gig. I should have had Jeff.
The book is going to help that.
Right. Thank you. But the point is that I gave this talk. We did not have a meeting with our buyer. In January, we got a purchase order for 4 SKUs to 2,000 stores that we didn't even solicit. That had never happened in my 25 years in business. And it was testament to the fact that they're rewarding companies who are going to give them less cardboard, less weight, less shelf space, etc. Why? Because they know money is the money they're going to make. They can change their lighting, they can change their building, they can change their trucking, and they are. But the money they're primarily going to make is when their supply chain shrinks our footprint.
Yeah, they have estimated that those packaging guidelines are going to save them $4 billion and their suppliers $8 billion, I believe, by 2013.
Yeah.
But let me ask you another question, because I think you're uniquely positioned to answer it. I was very interested that you started talking about how you wanted to become Kraft, because I gather that recently you've become part of Groupe Danone, which is a gigantic, one of the largest, $20 billion food company. We've talked about the supply chain, but it was funny because they sent me the copy of the press release that announced that you were on the board. And in the actual press release, they described your business model as a militant environmental model. I love militant environment. I miss the 60s. So tell us a little bit about how you're able to or unable to influence, because this is real leverage.
Yeah. That's why we did it.
Right. Tell us a little bit about how that's worked or not worked.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Well, first I have to tell you a quick anecdote. I was giving a speech in December, and a woman came up and brought me a package of Kraft American cheese singles that were organic. So I didn't have to become Kraft. They've become me. It's very vindicating. So And seriously, what Jeff was talking about earlier, we welcome all comers into the organic space. And because the truth is, the only way we're going to get supply chain to grow is by getting more and more players in the game. Specifically, Kraft, Nabisco, Kellogg's. I talk to all of these folks now because although we compete, as Jeff described with Nike, we need them. We need them in the game. Private label organic, which is one of my great adversaries, is nevertheless one of my great allies right now. Although my customers have become my competitor, the fact is that they are doing two things that are really profound here. One is they're making organic more rational and reasonable to people I probably wouldn't reach, who are more price sensitive. And secondly, the rising tide is lifting all boats. They're increasing the supply chain. And this is why we partnered with Danone. Just for background, we had I bootstrapped my company through our first 18 years. We had 297 shareholders. By 1998, I needed to get them an exit. I did not want to take the company public because I watched what happened with Ben and Jerry's, and I saw with Ben, the real loss of control that took place there for him. And so I set out to find a partner who would purchase what was then 80% of my company. That's what the 297 shareholders represented, but leave me in control. And after the first 19 suitors said, "You're out of your bloody mind," and Danone, to their credit, and one other company, ConAgra, truth be known, said, "Well, you know what? We can accept that idea. You represent a business model that is the 21st century. We don't understand it. Let's see what we can do together." And we spent 2 years haggling out a deal. That's a very odd relationship, I don't have to tell you. And the long and the short of it is that the deal has left us completely independent. They have 2 veto rights on us. One is CapEx over $1 million, and the other is any new acquisitions. And otherwise, I'm free to compete with Danone or anybody else. They have no say. We have a majority. I have 60% board control. But you're absolutely right. The reverse energy flow has been tremendous. We've launched organic lines now in Canada, Ireland, France. You may know the project. I'm on a board called Danone Communities with Mohammed Yunus. We've launched our yogurt plant in Bangladesh that's producing yogurt for 3 pennies per cup. We are, next week, Danone will announce an initiative. I think I can make it public here.
Here we go.
We'll see. That they're going to require every one of their what they call CBUs, country business units, there's 90 of them in the dairy group, to do a carbon footprint and to have measurable reductions in CO2 on an annualized basis, and they've created a bonus program where 50% of all employees' bonuses are going to be tied to sustainability. I work with them on.
And have you had a role?
Yeah, we're very involved in all of this stuff. Our organic supply chain, although they're not an organic company, they're joining me in visits to all of our organic suppliers to see if maybe there's organic ingredients they can start to bring in to their regular supply chain. I have to tell you, they're an extraordinary company, but in 7 years I have had not a moment's regret in joining them. It's absolutely widened the aperture in terms of my reach and taught me a huge amount about what a company at that scale can do. And just to cut to the punchline, why did Danone do this? Why did they buy into a company and leave this little punk, who wasn't exhaling back in the 60s? Why do they leave him in charge of of this company that's growing at these rates? Well, the answer was summarized by Franck Ribot when we closed the deal. He's the chairman of Danone. He said, Stonyfield represents an ethic that we at Danone have to adopt if we're going to be successful in the 21st century. And you know what? He stayed absolutely honorable to that time and again. Now, Danone is a public company. They're fiercely independent. They're militantly independent, I might say. They don't want to be acquired by Kraft, Nestle, Nabisco, and Kraft or Nestle or Unilever. So they view these kinds of initiatives as their future. And it doesn't hurt that their largest customer, Walmart, has also said, we're going to reward them for making those shifts.
One last question. I think we only have about 3 or 4 minutes, so I'd like to ask a question and ask you each to give sort of a 90-second answer to it, which is, the literature is full of win-win situations, the sweet spot, where if you do the right thing, you'll make more profit at it. I'd love to hear from each of the CEOs, what do you do in those, I'm sure, not infrequent situations when profitability and sustainability really clash, where doing the right thing is actually not going to be good for the bottom line. And how do you think about that, and how would you advise the business people and the NGOs out in the room to think about that? And I would ask you to just give a quick, I know this is a complicated question. Gary, why don't you go first, and if you could just give us a brief answer.
Yeah,
Thank you.
The classic.
Oh, no.
Read the book.
Read his book.
Read the book. There's the answer. Yeah.
The classic was, for me, was the waste treatment plant I just mentioned. We exceeded the capacity of our local wastewater plant. We had to build a new plant, big capex. We knew that we have this myth of a way. I went to for a plant at my scale would produce 1 truckload of sludge every week. So I went to the local authorities in Londonderry and I said, what do I do with the sludge? And they said, it's really easy. You send it to Vermont, which was their definition of a way. And I suppose Vermonters send it back to New Hampshire. I don't really know. But anyhow, I knew we couldn't be a net exporter of that. And so I looked. I had worked in China in the early in the late 70s and early 80s, and I had discovered these anaerobic facilities. And we examined and looked around and found a phenomenal updated version of these old Chinese technologies that anaerobically produce this useful gas. I gulped at it. It was a 17% higher capital cost, which was coming right out of our profits. And we built the thing because it was the right thing to do, and just sort of hoped that it was going to work out. Well, it turns out net after that 17% capex cost, this thing is going to generate, actually the numbers are got to be updated because of today's oil price, but it will generate around $4.5 million of net profit for me in the first 10 years. And it's a metaphor, and I appreciate the question, for the fact that virtually every time I've been confronted with this question, making the right choice ecologically has actually paid. Taking the lids off the yogurt cups, the tops, to reduce our weight saved us $1.2 million a year. Shifting over to form, fill, and seal packaging from preformed cups saved us $2.5 million a year. I mean, it becomes a kind of almost a sport in the company. But I have to say that that's how we're funding our growth, not by cutting our farmers' costs, which is the other choice we've made. As grain goes up, we've had to pay our farmers more. And so that's the one sacred place we won't compromise, but we'll find efficiencies elsewhere.
Thank you. Jeff, how does Timberland look at these conflicts that come up sometimes between doing the right thing and, the single bottom line?
Well, the model Gary describes is just a higher formed, better chiseled model than the one we deploy. But we aspire to that model because we get paid as CEOs to respond to pressure and create innovative solutions. And so there has to be a few things that are absolutely inviolate. There have to be a few places that aren't open for conversation, because an unbound problem doesn't get resolved. It flows around, then charisma is the question. We're going to do this because I say so. It doesn't work for me as a parent, and it doesn't work for me as an executive. But you have to know what you believe in. And that's actually a relatively short list. That's comforting in the middle of the night. It's not 1,000 things I believe in. There's a few things that I believe in, and pressure brings you, to me anyways, introduces me to those principles, reintroduces me to them regularly. You say it happens regularly, almost every single day. But as long as you've limbed out what you won't negotiate about, the rest becomes, I love the phrase, a sport for complex problem solving. That is really where real value gets created. And it's not that we can't solve problems, right? Take a lid off of a yogurt cup, that's nutty. Ship shoes without a box. Well, everybody, you have to put shoes in a box. Somebody's going to figure out how to ship shoes without a box. They're going to save money. They're going to reduce their carbon footprint. They're going to delight a consumer who doesn't even imagine such a possibility. I want to be the guy that does that, because you call it a triple bottom line. They call it sustainable prosperity. I call that's consistent with those very few things that I believe I'm accountable for when the day is done. So the model is simple: believe in something, and then engage desperately with other creative minds that seek the same outcome. That doesn't mean we succeed, because we fail. Only we, Timberland, me, Jeff, personally, I feel way more than I succeed deploying this model. But God give me tomorrow, I'll take another shot at it again, because I don't know a different way to solve problems.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Swartz. Very well.